Matthew introduces us to Jesus Christ back in chapter 4 with these words, and I quote from the Gospel of Matthew. He went about all of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every infirmity among the people. So his fame spread throughout all of Syria, and they brought to him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, and epileptics, and paralytics, and he healed them. And then seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, the disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," and so forth. We're very familiar with that opening of Jesus' ministry, his Sermon on the Mount. And just last Sunday, we reviewed a chosen dozen of his top teachings as marching orders for the church, as we in turn do our part to spread that gospel to all the nations. I do appreciate Jesus in his role as a teacher. I look to his life as recorded in the Gospels as a role model of what humans ought to be like, what God expects of us, and how we can live more fully. But frankly, I can't help but wonder about all those healing miracles that Jesus was able to perform. And I am not able to do. And nor do I expect it from any of you either. Jesus' followers in Alpena, we don't come here because we're going to get our aches and pains fixed. That's what we have the regional medical center for. But what do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that Jesus drew crowds, throngs of people, not because of his challenging teachings, because they knew he was a powerful healer. He was a miracle worker, and that's what drew them. For example, in the text that Patrick Labadie read for us, we heard that Jesus again went up on a mountain, sat down there, and I'm supposing that he was going to teach again like he did the first time as great crowds came to him. But apparently they were not coming to hear another sermon. No, by this time in his ministry, they're bringing with them the lame and the maimed and the blind and the dumb and many others. And they put them at his feet, and he healed them. And so the throng wondered when they saw the dumb speaking and the maimed whole and the lame walking and the blind seeing. They glorified the God of Israel. Unquote. Now look, I have no doubt that healing is possible through our faith in Jesus Christ. The healing comes from God. And we're going to look at one specific instance, that Canaanite woman's daughter. We'll look at that in detail in just a moment, but first let's get real. This is the 21st century. Do we allow for the possibility of healing miracles? Or is that a thing of the past? I mean, talk of miracles has for lots of folk become merely a turn of phrase. The word has lost its meaning. We saw an example of it just this past week when the president praised the police force in Las Vegas for shooting last Sunday's sniper. Twice in his opening remarks about that event, twice he said it was a miracle. A miracle. Personally, I would have addressed the tragedy, the grief, the shock of the mass murder before I would announce a miracle. And since it did take the police 10 minutes to locate and eliminate the shooter, I frankly don't see much of a miracle happening in that. But then I'm a theologian. I'm not a politician. I'm a preacher. I am not a president. And furthermore, I admit right up front that I am not a miracle worker. Don't expect it from me. In my experience, the credibility of miracle stories is a stumbling block for many faithful Christians. We follow Jesus, yes, we do. We take his words seriously. We learn from his behavior new ways to relate. We want to create a more compassionate society in Jesus' name, for God's sake. Yes, I'm all for that kind of Christianity. We accept the challenge of discipleship. We accept the cost and the joy of being a follower of Jesus' way. We're on that way as best we can, asking ourselves, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? We would walk in his steps day by day. And that's all well and good. But then we bump into these miracle stories about Jesus, and we find them incredible. Can a modern Christian who values intellectual integrity, who knows something about the laws of physics and quantum mechanics, about energy as a particle or a wave, or a little bit of chaos theory, can we accept miracles? For 4 full years, I have preached in this pulpit, and until today, I have hardly ever mentioned Jesus' healing miracles. And as far as I can tell, nobody minded, because apparently nobody missed them. Miracles are not a measure of who we are as a church. But today's text, which lists the blind seeing, the lame walking, the maimed made whole, the dumb speaking, and that doesn't mean me from the pulpit, it makes me realize that healings are an integral part of the gospel story about Jesus. Matthew tells us that the crowds glorified the God of Israel when they witnessed these healings being done by Jesus. Miraculous, life-changing events are intricately woven in the warp and the woof of Jesus' whole ministry. So we should not treat them as incidental or accidental or some extrinsic frame that can be discarded now that we are enlightened. I think we have to grant the possibility of miracles even in our day, in our lives. Not as an intrusion from some supernatural realm into an otherwise orderly world of nature, but as part of our reality. We should expect them more often than we do. So let me say it this way. Because life is a dynamic process, an unfolding experience of interrelated phenomena, miracles are not so much suspensions of ordinary existence, interruptions of ordinary life, as rather they are an expression of the universe itself coming into consciousness in our midst. The universe is alive and well and working in each of our lives. See, the president is not the only one who misunderstands the meaning of miracle. In olden days, whenever events baffled people, baffled the popular understanding, it was deemed a miracle had happened because they didn't understand it. And even today, the word is used primarily for things that science has yet to find a verifiable or feasible explanation. The remission of a cancer, for example, that has been assumed to be terminal and inoperable, when there's remission and the person comes out whole again, we say that's a miracle cure. We don't know how it happened, we just know that it happened. Or someone who awakens from a long-term coma beyond the reach of medical science, we say that's a miracle. I think it's time to admit there is more to life than just the observable, provable, scientifically demonstrable things that surround us, things that are subject to the laws of materialism and motion and relativity and thermodynamics. There is all that. Yes, there is. There is also a spiritual world. There are cosmic energies from the very beginning of time that run through all of physical reality. And it's just as real. Spirituality is not unreal. In fact, I believe it is eternally real, and it's not just some ephemeral passing phenomenon. And that's why when we talk at Common House about wave and particles, when we talk on Wednesday about the spirituality involved in addiction recovery, we're talking about real things, invisible things, non-manipulable things, but real. So even though I am unable to replicate that part of Jesus' ministry, and I don't expect healing miracles from you either, I have no doubt that Jesus could. And according to the gospel record, Jesus' reputation as a healer was a significant part of who he was. He was a concrete, living example of God's compassion and life-giving power. Wherever he went, it seemed to just exude from him, and people could touch his garment. People could just say, I believe, and it was enough. And I say, thank you, Jesus, for that. And then having said all that, it struck me really odd that in the first part of today's reading, Jesus didn't appear prepared or willing to help a Canaanite woman's demon-possessed daughter. I mean, here's how Matthew tells it. Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. What this means is that Jesus crossed the borders to the north of Israel. He went into the region of Tyre and Sidon, which is a province of Greater Syria, which the Romans called Phoenicia, which we nowadays refer to as southern Lebanon. In other words, Jesus and his disciples have left Israel behind. He is no longer in Judea. He's no longer in the Holy Land. Jesus has moved into foreign territory. I wonder what kind of currency they used, and whether an Israelite shekel would be welcomed in Syria. But there, in this foreign place, he meets a Canaanite woman, a Syro-Phoenician, a resident Palestinian. She's a non-Jew in a non-Jewish setting. And Jesus is a stranger. He's out of place here. And yet this Canaanite woman comes to meet him, crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely possessed by a demon." And at first, Jesus appears to ignore her, which is quite uncharacteristic of him. He did not answer her a word. His disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away. She is crying after us." Now you'll notice they did not beg